Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah Anstein. I'm Director of Partnership and Outreach here at the One Ohio Recovery Foundation. This is our Regional Grant Cycle 2 question set and grant portal training. So we're really excited to have you here. As always, follow us on social media. Be sure to sign up for updates on our website if you do not receive our email communications. If you have any questions about the grant round, you can email us at apply@oneohiofoundation.com. And then just a few housekeeping webinar reminders before we jump into the content. This webinar will be recorded and it will be posted on the One Ohio Recovery Foundation website. So if you had a friend or a colleague that wasn't able to join today, or you want to go back and rewatch a section, this will be recorded and will be posted on our website. If you have questions throughout today's webinar, please put them in the Q&A. We will do our best to get through as many of them as we can. And for this webinar, please keep your questions focused on the question set and the grant portal. We did 2 additional webinars on just the RFP. So if you have questions more related to the RFP, we may not get to you because we really want to prioritize those that are focused on the actual questions themselves and how to use the grant portal and submit your funding inquiry. So again, if you have RFP specific questions, please watch those recordings or send us an email. We're going to prioritize questions related to this webinar on today's call. And any scenarios that we go over today are for illustrative purposes only, so keep that in mind. They don't necessarily reflect a requirement or a preference, but just kind of gives you an example of what something might look like. And again, this is a very competitive grant process, and the foundation staff ability to provide direct guidance to you on your funding inquiry is limited. So we really want to make sure that everyone gets the same information and that everyone is treated fairly. So therefore, we can't give guidance real specific to your submission. Next slide, please. So real quickly about the One Ohio Recovery Foundation. We are a nonprofit charitable foundation that was created to distribute 55% of Ohio's opioid settlement funds. Next slide. And if you didn't already know, again, the foundation receives 55%. And so that's what we are here talking about today. The local governments receive 30% directly to them. And then the state receives 15%. So that is Ohio's distribution formula for the opioid settlement funds. Next slide. We'll talk quickly about our roadmap to impact here at the foundation. So on our next slide, you'll see our mission to save lives, prevent substance misuse, promote recovery, and build resilient communities by uniting partners, advocating for change, fostering innovation, and investing in effective strategies, which is what we do with our regional grant cycles. And then you can see on the next slide our vision, which I won't read, but we're proud of our new mission and vision statement and can't do this work without all of you. So on the next slide, you can see our purpose, which is made very clear in the foundation's articles of incorporation. You know, our purpose is to promote the health and safety of Ohioans, to advocate for the interest of Ohioans, and then to fund programs and services, which again, we're here talking about today. So we're really excited. And now we're going to kick it off to our fabulous grants manager to talk about Regional Grant Cycle 2. Our question set, and how to use the grant portal. Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Spires. Really excited to be sharing the grant portal and questions with all of you today. I'm going to start by quickly reviewing our process. Step 1, applicants submit a funding inquiry. So this step will be the focus of today's webinar. After that, the 19 regional grant review committees receive those or review those funding inquiries submitted to their region, and they make recommendations for applicants they would like to see move forward in the process. Those recommendations are then reviewed by the expert panel who checks who reviews for that evidence component and to ensure that there's consistency with our abatement strategies and approved purposes. And then at step 4, those who are recommended to move forward in the process will be invited to submit a technical application, and those who are not moving forward in the process will receive a declination notice at this time. Those recommended to move forward will then be reviewed by the Grants Oversight Committee, who will make recommendations to the Board of Directors, who ultimately awards funding. As Sarah said, we have already done 2 webinars that focused on the request for proposals itself. Those recordings are available on our website. So if you're looking for information about the RFP, funding priorities, eligibility requirements, and all the guidelines related to this funding opportunity, please watch the recording of Regional Grant Cycle 2 webinar found on our website. There are many resources available to applicants on our website, and as a best practice, we recommend that you review these resources before creating an account in the portal and starting to work on the questions. Really review the RFP to make sure that you are eligible and a good fit for funding before you waste any time filling out an application to then maybe find out you're not eligible. Additional resources on the website include the evidence guide, the funding inquiry questions. So all the questions that you find in the grant portal can also be found in a PDF on our website. That's really useful if you're collaborating with coworkers or partner organizations. You can work outside of the grant portal and then just have that one team member come and actually submit the questions in the grant portal. Also available in the toolkit is the funding priorities document, which we'll mention several times throughout. So just want to highlight now that this is where you can find it on our website. Additional resources you will find there include the timeline and process overview, frequently asked questions, which we will continue to update throughout this process, and several helpful webinar recordings, including a grant implementation readiness and an upcoming webinar that will focus on the evidence component. That's coming up January 27th. So if you would like to register for that, please go to our website. The deadline to submit all funding inquiries is Wednesday, February 11th at 5 p.m. Any late submissions will not be accepted or considered for funding. So please make sure you're paying attention to this deadline and getting your materials submitted well in advance. And all materials must be submitted through the grant portal. Any materials that are sent via email or mail will not be considered for funding. So anything that you want to be included in your funding inquiry needs to get submitted through the grant portal. We are utilizing a new grant management system this cycle called Giving Data. So if you are a previous applicant, materials that were submitted previously to One Ohio during Grant Cycle 1 are not going to be available in the new grants management system. So everyone will be starting fresh and creating a new account, which is what we're going to talk about first. So your first step, you'll go to our website. It's the top thing you're going to see on that grants page. It's going to say, click here to start a funding inquiry. So you will click that button, and then you will be asked to put in an email. And it's going to send you an email with a link that will allow you to establish your password and enter the grant portal. So that email is going to come from mail@givingdata.com. So if you have any email securities in place, please make sure that you are adding mail@givingdata.com as a safe sender. So that will prevent anything from going to your spam folder. And if you are waiting on an email that you're expecting an email you don't receive, always please remember to go check your spam filter. And just remember, your organization may have securities in place on your email that you're not even aware about. So it's always good practice. Check in with your IT, find out if you need to add this to a safe sender list. In the new grant portal, only one user will be accessing a funding inquiry form at a time. So there won't be multiple users in the same form. So you need to identify one person at your organization who will be the person actually working in the grant portal. And any collaboration with coworkers or partners will happen outside of the grant portal. All right, so you've clicked that link and you've created a password, and now you have entered the grant portal. You'll see a button that says Start a New Funding Inquiry. And the first thing that you're going to be asked to do is to add an organization. So if you were already existing in our system, you may see your organization pop up here and you can select it, but you're first going to click Add New Organization if you don't see it there. And you will then be able to search the IRS database for your organization. So here's what it looked like when we searched for One Ohio Recovery Foundation. If I was submitting this grant, I would just select that as my organization and start the funding inquiry. If you don't see your organization pop up from the IRS search, that is okay. You just need to scroll to the bottom of the search results and you'll see none of these organizations are correct. They're in blue. So you just click none of these organizations are correct and you will be able to manually enter your organization. After you've selected your organization, you're going to see the welcome screen, the introduction page of the funding inquiry itself. There's a link here to the RFP, and there's also a link back to our website for you to go look at all those really helpful resources that we have there. And on the right hand of the screen, you will see the pages of the funding inquiry. So I'll zoom in on that right hand side. The blue circles will be filled with a check mark when that page is complete. You can move between the sections and you do not have to complete them in order. So a really helpful navigation here that will show you your progress in completing the funding inquiry. There are a number of questions in the funding inquiry that will involve you selecting a checkbox. So we just wanted to call out that we have noticed sometimes the system, maybe there's a slowness and you go to click the checkbox and it doesn't register your first check. But don't worry, just click a second time and it will save it. So yes, we are aware sometimes there's a slowness regarding the checkboxes. Please just click a second time and you'll see a green checkbox should appear when that selection has been made. And if you need to change your selection to a checkbox, please note that you must first uncheck your selection before you can make a new selection. So in the screenshot we see here, if I was a governmental agency and I accidentally clicked nonprofit, to change my answer, I must first click the green box next to nonprofit to unselect nonprofit, and then the system will allow me to select governmental agency. Just a couple little quirks with checkboxes, but it shouldn't cause anyone problems. At the bottom of each page, you will see this content. You can go backwards or forwards in the funding inquiry. You can flag a section to remind yourself to go back later. You can also view and print this application, and there is a save button at the bottom of the page. The system will save your work automatically. However, we have noticed if you're clicking very quickly between pages, the system might not have the opportunity to catch up. So if you're moving really fast, it's probably a good idea just to click save at the bottom to make sure that your change had time to be saved. All right, I'm going to walk us through each section of the funding inquiry and we will review the questions as we go. So first up is your organizational information. You will be asked to provide your EIN. And if your organization is part of a larger organization, or if you have a fiscal sponsor, you'll be asked to provide that information. If you do have a fiscal sponsor, we will ask for their EIN. And if you're part of a large network, maybe you have a parent organization that works with you, maybe you're connected in some way. We know a lot of our grantee organizations are affiliated with many others. So we're just asking to understand the structure of your organization. So you have the option to let us know if you have a parent or subsidiary organization connected to you. We will ask for your mailing address. This is the organization's main address. So we do understand that this might not be the address where services are taking place, and that is okay. What we're asking for here is your main organizational mailing address. And you'll also identify the county where your organization is headquartered and provide us with your organization website. You'll be asked for the year the organization was founded. Eligible organizations have been in operation for 2 years or more, and this is defined as being registered with the Ohio Secretary of State with your current EIN for 2 consecutive years. Now, we understand that some organizations may have a unique circumstance that is preventing them from meeting this requirement. But if you have been in operation for more than 2 years and you have some unique circumstances, you have the opportunity to tell us about that, and we will consider those on a case-by-case basis. So if you don't meet this requirement, please just give us an explanation as to why. Previously funded organizations who are in good standing are eligible to apply. And if you're unsure if your organization has been previously funded, maybe you're part of a very large university, for example, please check our list of our awardees. That list is on our website and it is linked for you directly in the funding inquiry form. You can go there, you can search, you can sort by organization name and just double check if you're a previous awardee. If you are, you will be asked to describe the connection to the previously funded project. So is this new request a continuation of the previous project, or is it a completely new, unrelated initiative? So you'll have the opportunity to explain that to us here. The next section is the administrative information, and there are 3 attachments in this section. If you are required to file a 990, we ask that you upload your most recent 990. If you're not required to file, you can skip that upload. All applicants will be providing a W-9, and we'll be asking our nonprofit and for-profit applicants to upload their certificate of good standing from the Ohio Secretary of State. If you don't have this on file, you are able to download that certificate from the Secretary of State website. And if you are a governmental applicant, this is not required for you, and you can just skip that attachment. We are asking for 2 contacts, the head of your organization and the primary contact for this funding inquiry. We understand at some small organizations, this may be the same person, but we are asking for 2 contacts at those larger organizations. All right, the project information section. The first question here is we're asking you to title your project or program. Please keep in mind that titles will be shared publicly and included in published materials. Please select a brief title that accurately reflects the work of the program. Do not include any sensitive information in the title. Keep in mind this is going to be published. So, for example, if you're a recovery house that keeps your address private for security purposes, you should not put the address of the recovery house in the title of your project. A couple additional things, you don't need to include your organization name in the title. We know who you are. Give us some new information in this title section. A good way to think about this is think about if your project has been funded and it's gone wildly successful, and 2 years from now, we want to write something in the news about how great your project has been. Your title will appear in that article. So make sure that it's how you want us referring to your project publicly. This is a regional grant process, so all funding inquiries must be for a specific region. Applicants are permitted to apply to more than one region, but your budget and your proposed activities must be specific to that region. And please keep in mind if you're submitting multiple funding inquiries, one region may select your project for funding and another may not. So each individual funding inquiry needs to be able to stand on its own, and not rely on 2 regions selecting it for funding. Here we have the regional map, which you can find on our website. You will select the abatement strategy, which most closely aligns with the work of the project. We understand that some projects include multiple abatement strategies, so we're just asking that you identify the primary one. For detailed descriptions of each abatement strategy, please review the funding priorities document, which is available on our website. I mentioned that one at the beginning as a really important document in the grant toolkit. This will provide detailed definitions of each abatement strategy, as well as provide examples of the types of services and programs that fit into each category. So if you're unclear which abatement strategy you belong to, please go review that funding priorities document. You will also select the activity area, which best describes your project. These activity areas help define the core function of your program's funding. So these activity areas fit within the abatement strategies. And again, your project may touch on multiple, but just select the primary one. A description of each of these can be found in the funding inquiry form itself. And if you don't think your project fits into one of these activity areas, there is an other option where you can describe your primary activities. However, we did find that in cycle one, all of our grantees fit into one of these categories. So we do expect that most of our applicants would be able to see the work of their project represented here. Next, you will be identifying any other organizations that are a part of this project, any other partners that you may have in the community. Just make sure that they are aware you're naming them in your funding inquiry and that they are 100% committed to the work of the project. Due to the volume of applicants, we are not accepting letters of support as part of this process. So the good news is you don't have to ask your partners to write you a letter because we're not accepting them. Some regions have identified funding priorities, and in those regions, they are only accepting applicants whose proposals align with those priorities. So in this example, we can see that Region 17 selected 3 funding priority areas. So if your project doesn't fit within one of these 3 areas, you are not eligible to apply to Region 17. But if it does, we'll just ask, please let us know which of these funding areas does your project fit under. Our funding priorities align with the abatement strategies, as we said. So you'll want to see the RFP will show you each region's funding priorities, and then you can go look at that funding priority document for additional details on what that means. And if you're applying to a region that did not set funding priorities, they didn't all. So you just won't see this question if you've selected a region with no funding priorities. We have made it to the funding inquiry section of the funding inquiry. So this is your main narrative section where you will be describing the work of the project. It begins with the project program or goal. So we're looking for a very short, concise description of the project, including the overarching goal. Think of this as your elevator pitch. You only have 50 words. How succinctly can you explain to someone the goal of your project? You will then go into further detail and outline the proposed project, detailing the activities and the types of services to be provided. All of the narrative questions will have word limits, so please do pay attention to the word limits in the system. If you submit additional words beyond 250, they will not be a part of your funding inquiry. So just know those word limits are going to cut off. If you submit extra words, we're not going to consider them. For the target population, successful applicants will have a direct connection to substance use disorder, including co-occurring mental health conditions. Programs must serve those with an SUD, prevent SUD, or serve children and families who've been impacted by a loved one's SUD or co-occurring mental health condition. So, given this as our defined target population, we will be asking you to explain how do you know that your program is serving or impacting individuals who have been impacted by SUD, including co-occurring mental health conditions. Please include the projected number of individuals that you anticipate being served or impacted from your project. You'll be asked to describe what does the success of your project and program look like? Describe your intended impact. What is it going to look like if this project is completely successful? What are you hoping to achieve? When thinking about sustainability, it's really important that everyone keep in mind that the funding that is available through this opportunity is temporary and may not be renewable. So applicants are going to be asked to present a clear and feasible sustainability strategy to ensure the continuation of services and impact beyond the grant period. So your sustainability plan should not be to apply for more grants from One Ohio because we cannot guarantee that that is going to be the case. So we're asking you to describe the specific options that you will pursue to sustain these services after One Ohio funding ends. And if you are struggling with this question, we did an Impact Academy, which just focuses on sustainability, and you can find a recording of that on our website. The guidelines regarding the appropriate use of funds are listed on this slide, so I'll quickly review. I know it's a lot of text on here, but requested funds should be used to support new, expanded, or improved programs or services. They should not be used to replace existing funding, which has already been allocated for the same purpose. So applicants should not be reducing their own organizational funding for a project or budget item due to receiving opioid settlement funds. However, if you had a previous source of funding which has completed or run out, you are eligible to apply for funding in those cases. Applicants must pursue and exhaust other available federal, state, and local funding opportunities before applying to One Ohio. So if there is another source for the type of funding that you are seeking, we ask that you seek that from that source first and then come to One Ohio. So for the use of funds question, you will be asked to describe how your proposal will create new or expanded programs or improve existing programs. And if this is a request for a continuation of work, you will explain what was the original funding source and when did that end. Okay, we have made it to the budget section, so it's time to go to math class, everyone. The first question that you will be asked is the total requested amount. This is the amount for the full 24-month project. And I'm going to pause here because for some reason this causes a lot of people confusion. So total requested amount should be the total amount of money for the full grant project, which lasts 24 months. If you only put the amount of funding you need for year one in this box, then that is the only high amount that you're requesting. This isn't a year one box. This is a total requested amount box. So please make sure this is the full amount that you are hoping to receive for the whole grant project. You'll then provide a project year breakdown, which will ask for the expenses of year one and the requested amount of year one. So we have the total requested amount, which is both years, and this requested amount, as we can see, it's in the project one breakdown box. So I'm going to go through all of these sections. The first one we're going to talk about is the expenses box, which you see at the bottom left. Expenses are the total cost of the project. So this includes the amount that is requested from One Ohio, and it may include project costs which are funded from other sources. And this includes funding that may be provided from your own the applicant organization, from your own organization. So expenses is referring to everything that must be paid for in order to make the project happen. So if One Ohio is the only funder for the project, then we would expect expenses and requested amount to be the same. However, if you have another funder or if your organization is contributing funding, then we would expect expenses to be higher than the requested amount. That requested amount is then the next part you will fill in. So this is the amount of funding that you are requesting from One Ohio for the first year of the project. You'll then give us details on that requested amount. You'll click this button here, requested amount detail, and you're going to give us a breakdown by budget category. So after you click that button, it'll open up to look like this. Please note that each budget category is required. So if you aren't, for example, requesting any service contracts, you still need to enter a 0 in that field or the system is going to recognize it as being incomplete. So you'll put a zero in any empty category here, which you're not requesting funding for. And please be sure to check your math. The system unfortunately doesn't have the capability to tally these categories, so you will need to make sure that the amount of funding you list in the budget categories adds up to equal that requested amount. So just check your math, your budget categories equal the yearly requested amount. Applicants may request up to 10% of their grant award to cover new or expanded administrative costs. Proposals that request more than 10% will be disqualified. So it's really important that you check your math on the admin support. Make sure that it is less than 10% of your award. And there is admin support in year 1 and in year 2 when you're giving us that yearly breakdown. So just make sure you've checked your math. You didn't accidentally request the full 10 in each year, right? You want to make sure it's 10% of the award total. Okay, now I know that was a lot and the budget section might be a little intimidating, so we're going to run through a basic budget example that will hopefully help explain some of those sections a little bit further. So in this example, an applicant wants to purchase a $40,000 van and hire a driver who they anticipate paying $30,000. So the total expenses of the project are $70,000, right? The van plus the payroll, we get $70,000. This applicant has secured $10,000 from Foundation X for this project. So the total requested amount becomes the amount of the expenses, $70,000, minus the $10,000, which has already been secured from another source, and that equals $60,000, the amount that is being requested from One Ohio for this project. So we see in total requested amount, we wrote $60,000, and that is for the full 24-month project. Now here we see the yearly breakdown for year 1. So this applicant anticipates using half of the payroll in year 1. So remember, payroll was $30,000, so we see $15,000 has been entered into payroll for year 1. And then they also are going to be purchasing the van in year 1. Now, you can't purchase half a van, right? So they need all of the funding for that van will be spent in year 1. And we see $30,000 is written in infrastructure. So the van cost $40,000, but remember they received $10,000 from another funder. So the amount they need for the van from One Ohio is $30,000, and we see that in infrastructure. So if we add the $15,000 in payroll to the $30,000 in infrastructure, we then get our yearly requested amount of $45,000, which you can see in the requested amount box. Now, in this case, the expenses is higher than the requested amount because remember the van costs $40,000. So that $10,000, which is being provided from another funder, is represented in the expenses box. So the expense of year 1 is $55,000, but the amount that's being requested from One Ohio for year 1 is $45,000. And then we see in year two, the only remaining expense for the project is the remainder of that payroll. So we have 15,000, the second half of the payroll for this request. And we see here, since there's nothing else being requested, we've entered a zero into every category so that the system knows that it is complete. And in this example, the requested amount and the expenses are the same because there are no other funders that are contributing to year two of the project. At the bottom of the budget section, you will see this. And this is the only part of the system that's actually doing some math for you. So you're going to see total expenses and total requested amount. And those are tallying from what you've put in your yearly amounts. So if your total requested amount that you see here does not match the amount you entered above. Remember, you were asked total requested amount. And if you get down to the bottom and this doesn't match, that means you have a math error somewhere and you need to go back and check. And the same thing for total expenses. This is tallying your year one and year two expenses and letting you know right here, that's how much you've entered into the system. Total revenue is a system default that we are unfortunately unable to remove. So everyone's going to see total revenue say $0 because we are not asking any applicants to provide information about revenue. So please just disregard that line. It will say zero for everyone. The key takeaways for the budget section are to check your math. You want to make sure that the request amount detail, the amount you put in the budget categories, that needs to equal the yearly requested amount. You need to make sure that project year one plus project year two equals your total requested amount. And you also need to check and make sure you're not requesting more than 10% admin. Okay, we've gotten out of the numbers. We're done with math class, but there are a few narrative questions related to your project next. So you will just be giving us a narrative description of the plan for your budget. We're not asking you for line item detail at this stage, but you can tell us, describe for us a little bit more about how you're going to use the funds. And you'll be asked to describe those other funders which came into play in the expenses. So if you've received funding from another foundation, you'll tell us that here. If your organization is contributing, you'll tell us that here. If you have submitted grant applications and you're still waiting to find out whether or not you've secured the funding, you can also tell us about that in this section. We're just looking to learn who else is involved in the project. If you are requesting funds for an infrastructure or capital expense, there will be two additional questions related to the ownership and the control of the asset. So what we're looking for here is, are you requesting a capital expense for something you will own? Or is it for something that maybe you rent or lease? Maybe there's a partner organization whose space it is, but you facilitate your project there. Just describe for us the relationship, particularly if you're not the owner, who is, and what does that mean for the project? And you'll then be asked to describe your readiness to proceed. So how quickly will you be able to execute this project? We know that infrastructure and capital can take a very long time. So we're trying to understand, where are you in your process with this readiness to proceed question. We have made it to the evidence information section of the funding inquiry. And as a best practice, I strongly recommend that you review the evidence guide before starting this section. We understand the evidence component may be new to a lot of applicant organizations, so this guide is really going to walk you through everything that you need to know. You will start by selecting from a multiple choice list your project aims. What are you attempting to achieve with this project? These aims have been identified and will be related to your abatement strategy. So if you've selected recovery as your abatement strategy, you'll see those recovery aims, the aims that we would expect a recovery project might achieve. Now, if you don't see your specific aim listed, there is an other option. So you do have the option to tell us what that is if we haven't pre-captured it on our list. You will describe the community need for your project. How do you know that your community needs these services? And how do you know that your community is ready for these services? So these questions get about how do you know that your project's going to be successful in your community, and how do you know that your community will benefit from that project? You'll be asked to describe your plan for implementing your program to fidelity. Fidelity refers to how do you know that you're implementing the evidence-based practice as it was designed to be implemented. Now, some practices have published fidelity tools that you have access to. So if your program or project has a tool, that's great. Please tell us about it and your plan for how you'll use it. And if it doesn't, please let us know what is your organization's plan to make sure that you are implementing this evidence-based practice as intended. Applicants have three options for demonstrating the evidence of effectiveness for your project. So option A, you would be selecting from a pre-approved list. Option B is selecting from a pre-approved evidence registry. And C is our other. If you don't fall under A or B, you still have the opportunity to apply and describe for us your project at option C. So I'll go over these very quickly. A We'll be asking you, option A will ask you to select from our pre-approved list. This is a list of services, models, tools, and programs that were funded by the One Ohio Recovery Foundation in Cycle 1. And they were identified by the expert panel in 2025 as having adequate evidence of effectiveness to be considered for funding in Cycle 2. Now, this isn't a comprehensive list of all the effective strategies and programs that exist. This is just One Ohio's pre-approved list, ones that we have already dived into, we already researched and checked their effectiveness. So we're not saying these are the only effective programs. This is just the pre-approved list as a starting place to find evidence-based and evidence-informed approaches. Now, if your project isn't found on the pre-approved list, then you'll be selecting from B or C. Now, B or C involves selecting from a pre-approved evidence registry. So these registries were not created by One Ohio, but you are able to let us know if these pre-approved registries do identify your project or program as having an evidence basis. And there'll be some follow-up questions there. Again, please go look at the evidence guide if this is feeling a little bit confusing. And option C is kind of our other. So you're not selecting from a list of checkboxes as you are in the previous two. And you will just be explaining to us, why are you confident that this project will achieve the project aims that you are seeking? And there are examples of this in the evidence guide. You will be asked to provide references and citations, and those do count towards your word limit. So just make sure as you're working that you're staying with under 400 words, including your references and citations, because those are very important to our expert panel who's then going to go and review this section. And if anything about the evidence that I just said sounded confusing, please register for our Impact Academy, the evidence guide for applicants, which is January 27th. And we will post a recording of that on our website if you're not able to attend, but we'll go really in depth, and someone with a lot more knowledge than me is going to explain all of that probably in a much better way. So really invite you to come to this upcoming webinar. We are nearing the end. You've made it to the attestation page. And here you'll be asked a series of questions that relate to the licensure, certification, and accreditation, both of your staff and of the organization itself. You'll also be asked about any organizational sanctions, suspensions, or censures, which may be related to the work of your project. And if for any reason you can't certify that these things are true, don't worry. There will be a drop down that allows you to explain your specific situation. For example, maybe your organization is in the process of seeking a licensure, but you don't currently have it, but you anticipate having it by the time you launch your project. You could provide that explanation to us. So if your answer to any of these is that you can't certify or can't attest, just know there's going to be an option for you to explain your situation. You'll be asked to acknowledge our transparency policy, which states that applicants are advised that after grants are awarded, information contained in the funding inquiry and grant applications may be subject to the One Ohio Foundation transparency policy, and it may be viewed by members of the public, including news agencies and agency competitors. So, funding inquiries and applications should not contain confidential or sensitive information or trade business secrets. So, we do work very hard at One Ohio to be as transparent as possible. So, please just know that if you're submitting materials to us, those materials may fall under our transparency policies. You will then be asked to sign your funding inquiry, and by signing it, you are attesting that the head of organization has authorized you to submit this application and that everything contained within the funding inquiry is true. You will make it now to the review and submit page. So you will see this. In this example, when the screenshot was taken, only one of 10 steps was completed. So you could see I wouldn't actually be able to click on that submit. I'd have to go back. But if you've gotten that all of your steps are completed, then that submit will be available for you to send. If you at any point flagged a page saying, I want to come back to this section, you would see that represented under the little red flag there. And you are able to view or print your application if you need to. I strongly recommend doing that for your own record keeping. We are hearing from applicants from 2 years ago asking for the materials that they submitted to us. So do your future coworkers a favor and save a copy of this somewhere outside of the grant portal where your coworkers can access it. So after you have clicked submit, you would see your home screen would look a little something like this. So in this example, I have one submitted funding inquiry and I have one in progress. We do have a submission cap for cycle 2. So applicants are limited to submitting 2 requests per region as the lead applicant. You may appear as partners on additional requests. This limitation only refers to the lead applicant. Please note that any additional funding inquiries submitted beyond the 2 per region will not be considered for funding. And this includes any test forms that you may be submitting. Please do not submit test forms. Staff has tested it. It works. We feel great about it. You don't need to submit a test form. It's only going to create confusion and potentially prevent your organization from being able to submit a real form later on. So keep in mind that there is a limit to 2 requests per region. If you are part of a large organization, you need to coordinate internally to make sure that you're not exceeding this cap. There is technical assistance available to you. We ask that if you have a question, you start by reviewing our website, the RFP, the FAQs, and all of the many materials that are available to you on our website. It is extremely likely that your question can be answered by reviewing those materials. However, if you still have a question, you can send that to apply@oneohiofoundation.com. And all grant-related communications should be sent directly to One Ohio Foundation staff, because that's how you're going to know you're getting the most up-to-date and correct information. To maintain the integrity and fairness of this highly competitive grant cycle, staff cannot provide direct guidance on project-specific questions. So please know that if you're getting very detailed, we may not be able to answer your question because we want to keep it fair for everyone and have an even playing field for all applicants. During this process, all official communication to applicants will come from One Ohio Recovery Foundation staff, either through the grant portal or through an official email from the foundation. If you receive an email, please make sure that it's actually from One Ohio. We have heard that there are some vendors who are marketing grant writing services in a way that might look like the email is coming from One Ohio. However, it is not. It is an outside vendor promoting their services, and we are not affiliated. So if you think you're emailing with the foundation, please go look at the email address and make sure that you're not actually maybe emailing an outside vendor. So always just good practice with email security. Double check who you're emailing with. To maintain the integrity and fairness of the grant review process, applicants shall not contact foundation board members, regional board members, or the expert panel regarding this process. Unauthorized contacts with these individuals could lead to you getting incorrect information, and it may have an impact on the review and approval of the grant proposal. So please remember, any communication should only be happening with One Ohio Recovery Foundation staff. And this is a fun picture of all the many resources available to you on the website. I can't plug it enough. Please go check it out. There's a lot of great information there. As always, you can get the latest updates from us on these channels. And with that, I would love to take any questions related to the grant portal or question set.
Yes, we've got some great questions. And for folks that are on the line, look at those that we've answered already, because perhaps your question we answered, we typed our answer to it. So, Laura, could you talk to us a little bit about when we should select whether we have a parent organization or not? Like, how would I know if I do have a parent organization? Like if I'm, an agency or a department, can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. As far as when you will be asked, it's one of the very first things in the application. You've selected your organization, and it's going to be really the next section we'll hit at if you are a parent or you have a parent organization. As far as how to know whether you have one is a very interesting question that I don't know that I can answer for you. If you're unaware if you have one, that might mean that you don't. And you do have the option to select their name. I'm trying to think if there's a great way for you to explain that to us. But if you're not aware if you have a parent, I'm not sure that One Ohio can answer that question for you.
What about county agencies?
That's a great question. County agencies don't need to list a parent organization. If your county agency, blank county health department, we know what county you belong to, so you don't need to do that. However, if you do add it, nothing wrong with that either.
Perfect. Okay, where's the best place to look for definitions of the budget line items? If I wanted more
Great
detail on
question.
what, for example.
Great question. In the funding inquiry itself, at the top of the budget section, you will see definitions for each category. So that is within the portal itself. It'll explain what we mean by each budget section.
Is there a chance that someone may be approved for a partial award?
Yes, that is possible. Really great question. Sometimes grant review committees may choose to only award a partial amount of the request. That's really up to our regional grant reviewers, so they would be the ones making that recommendation. So yes, please know that that is possible. And if that is the case, you as the applicant would be informed at the stage where you're invited to submit the technical application. So the second step of our application process, that technical application, you will be informed if you received or if you're being recommended for a partial award, and then you'd be asked to submit a new budget which represents that. So you will know earlier in the process if that's the case, and if the partial award maybe doesn't work for your organization, you would have the opportunity to perhaps rescind your request at that time if that's what's appropriate for your organization.
Perfect, thank you. And there's a couple I'll answer live. I'll just hit real quick because it'll be quicker than me
Yeah.
reading it. So there's been a couple questions about an MOU, which if you were on our RFP webinar, that was just a recommended best practice if your project or proposal involves partnering with other organizations. Because one of the things we learned from Grant Cycle 1 was that sometimes folks didn't have all the necessary conversations prior to submitting and being awarded a grant. So one of our recommendations to folks is to have those conversations early and perhaps formalize that agreement. But the MOU is not required. We don't need to see it submitted. So it's just a recommended best practice as part of implementation readiness, so that if you're awarded, that you would be ready to go because you've already crossed all the T's, dotted all the I's as it relates to your partners. So hopefully that clears up that MOU question. That was just a recommended best practice, but you do not submit it to us and we can't kind of tell you how to do that. And then oh no, I lost it. Hang on. Some questions coming in about the highest amount you can request. If there is a limit, I would not request more than the region's allocation because they can't give something they haven't got. We would encourage you to look at the average awards from last time to get a sense for what that region funds. And we do have one region that put a cap on the highest award amount that they will fund. So please look at the RFP to get a better sense for how much funding to request based on the region's allocation, if they set that award cap, and also look at what they funded last time to get a sense for them. Okay. And another one, Laura, this is maybe one I can take. Someone asked about examples of organizational license. That's part of the attestation. Do the staff that are a part of this and your organization have the appropriate licensure, certification, and accreditation to be doing what you're proposing to do. And we can't, tell you what you need to have to know whether you're appropriately licensed or certified to do it. But some examples would be if you're doing a peer support program, are your peer supporters certified? If you are wanting to, request funds for recovery housing, is your house certified by Ohio Recovery Housing and on the registry? You are seeking funds for treatment services. Does your agency, have the necessary certifications there? So it really depends on your industry and what you need to have. But that is something that we ask you to attest to, and then at any point in time, we can request any additional documentation to verify anything. And I know there's been a number of questions kind of about the pre-approved list, what's on it. I'm going to hold off on answering those because we have the Impact Academy on the evidence guide next week. So please join us for that. For any of you that ask questions that were more related to the evidence guide, we will send you the link to register for that webinar as well as the link to the guide. All of these are on the grants page, so please scroll through. I know some folks are saying they were having a hard time finding the evidence guide. It is under Grant Cycle 2 Toolkit, and it is the top left icon that you can click that says evidence guide, but we'll send you that link. Okay, pulling some questions back to you, Laura, because I have just said enough. So if someone is expanding a project, do they include all expenses for the entire project or just the expansion?
That's a good question. So we would expect to see the expenses for the full project, and then those amounts that are requested of One Ohio would be, obviously the requested amount. But I think if your organization is, funding the program, we do want to see what your organization is contributing to this project.
So if someone has other funds that either they're contributing or someone else is contributing, they should show that in the funding inquiry budget section.
That is correct. That'll come into play with the expenses column, right? Because expenses is the full cost of the project to your organization. So we'd see that come into play there. And then there'll be the other funds narrative question where you can describe the relationship that you have with either these other funders or if it's coming from your own organization.
Um, Looking through, I think we answered that one a couple of times. If someone has a DBA doing business as under an incorporation, is that an example of having a parent organization?
No, I don't think a DBA is the same thing as a parent organization. If you've got, for example, one EIN, then you're probably just one organization.
Perfect. Okay. And I can answer this one. If you are applying for two different funding opportunities, perhaps they're two different funding priorities. Yes, those would be two different funding inquiries that you would submit in the portal. As a reminder, you get two per region. So if you're applying for two totally different projects, two totally different funding priorities, they will need to be separate. But then it's kind of up to you if they're related, if you want to combine them or break them apart. But two per region. Looking to see. We answered that one. Okay, y'all I'm going a little slow because we've got lots of questions coming in. I want to pick the ones that apply to the most number of people. A lot of great questions in here. I think I would encourage folks to look at the RFP webinar again. A lot of questions I think that folks are asking will be covered in there, as well as looking at the resources on our website. And then where else? Okay. Yeah, and then there's been a lot of questions about the technical application. Laura, can you remind us when that comes into play and for who?
Sure, yes. So everyone will submit a funding inquiry as the first step of the process, and then it will be reviewed by the 19 regions, and they'll make recommendations for those they want to see move forward in the process. So those selected organizations which are moving forward will be invited to submit the technical application. It'll be pretty brief. It's going to involve, it's us really following up with you, making sure we have all the information that we need about the grant. You'll provide an updated budget. We did mention if there is a partial award, you would learn that at that time and be able to adjust, your proposed budget and activities to reflect the partial award. So that technical application will come in play for those who the regions recommend that they want to see move forward in the process.
And I know some folks are asking about answers to the questions from some of our previous webinars. Please go back and watch those recordings. We have our January 7th RFP webinar posted on the website so you can hear all the Q&A that we did. Then we are working to update our website with some additional FAQs. So keep checking back and watch those recordings. And then we got another question related to EIN and county agency. So if someone is with a county health department and they share the same EIN as the county as a whole, would that be considered having a parent agency because they all share the same EIN?
Well, we are defining organization by EIN. So if you share an EIN for the purposes of this opportunity, you are considered one organization.
Okay, that is a very good call out that I hope folks caught. So for the organization, it is defined by EIN. So you would put the county EIN, and each organization, which equals EIN, gets 2 submissions per region. Perfect. So I hope that helps answer some of those parent agency EIN specific questions. Okay, I think we covered most things that we can answer at this time. Laura, any final thoughts or things you want to say before we wrap up?
I think that's it. Thank you all so much for coming today. Please go check the resources on the website. And we're very excited to see your work. So happy writing and reach out if you need additional support.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day.